Welcome back to Put the Metal On. My name is Dave Cullen. We're back once more for a metal music review. For today, we're going to be talking about the 9th studio album from Whitechapel in Hymns of Dissonance, marking a bold return to their heavier roots after the more melancholic and experimental approach in their last few albums. So the band find themselves navigating the tension between old school deathcore brutality and the more refined, emotionally charged songwriting they've developed over the years. But does Hymns of Dissonance strike successfully in that balance, or does it fall in the trap of nostalgia at the cost of innovation? So by the time Whitechapel entered the studio to record Hymns in Dissonance, they had already cemented themselves as one of the more formidable forces in modern extreme metal. Their trajectory from a pure deathcore outfit to a more nuanced and emotionally driven band showcases their willingness to evolve, even at the risk of alienating parts of their fanbase. However, the return to a heavier, more brutal sound in this new album didn't come out of nowhere either. It was a culmination of years of experimentation, success, and artistic self-exploration. Whitechapel, of course, first emerged from the mid-2000s during deathcore's initial explosion, and unlike many of their peers, they brought a level of precision and intensity that really made them stand out. Their debut album, The Somatic Defilement, was a raw and relenting assault, heavily influenced by brutal death metal and grindcore. And while this album has its flaws, like lacking polish and variety, it set the foundation for their signature 3-guitar attack and low-end devastation. It was their 2008 album, This Is Exile, that was the real breakthrough though. A massive leap in production quality and songwriting. It defined their sound like anthems like Possession and Eternal Refuge. It was crushing, atmospheric, and relentlessly heavy, solidifying them as a leader in the genre alongside bands like Suicide Silence and Carnifex. 2010's album, A New Era of Corruption, expanded on this formula with even darker, more technical compositions. The album also experimented with more dissonant guitar work and groove elements though it lacked the raw intensity of the predecessors as a result. And while some fans hailed it as probably its most refined album, others felt less immediately impacted by it. It was their self-titled album in 2012 though that became a real turning point for the band. This is where they began to incorporate more groove-oriented riffing, with even slight hints of melody, signaling a shift away from deathcore's traditional boundaries. Songs like I Dementia, for example, showcase a more mature approach to songwriting, though the album still remained firmly rooted in heaviness. Their 2014 album, Our Endless War, took things a bit further, embracing more accessible song structures and groove metal influences. While some tracks like The Saw Is the Law, for example, became fan favourites, the album was very divisive. Some appreciate the newfound focus on the songwriting, but others felt it was a more of a commercialised step backwards. Their 2016 album, Mark of the Blade, was even bolder, as for the first time they introduced clean vocals, with Phil Bozeman delivering surprisingly emotional performances on songs like Bring Me Home. And while the album was still heavy, the album leaned a lot more into groove metal, dividing fans even further than ever. It was clear that Whitechapel were no longer just a deathcore band. And if it wasn't Mark of the Blade that really changed their approach, it was definitely their 2019 album, The Valley. This was a deeply personal album inspired by Bozeman's traumatic childhood. The Valley saw the band fully integrate clean vocals and atmospheric elements in this album. Tracks like When a Demon Defiles a Witch and Hickory Creek blended eerie melodies with crushing heaviness, proving that Whitechapel could do more than just plummet listeners into submission. This is probably widely regarded as both their best and most mature album. Even deathcore purists had to acknowledge it despite its depth and emotion. Their 2021 album, Pin, also built on this sound, but this time it leans further into both melody and storytelling. While the album still contained heavy moments, particularly from songs like Blood-Soaked Sympathy and Lost Boy, the album prioritized eerie, melancholic atmospheres, drawing comparison to bands like Opeth and Alice in Chains. Again, it was very divisive. Some bands loved this evolution from them, while others felt that Whitechapel were drifting too far away from their roots. But whatever the case, Kin showcased their ability to craft emotionally resonant music beyond breakdowns and blast beats. So despite the success of both The Valley and Kin, Whitechapel recognised that a portion of their fan base longed for a return to their heavier, more aggressive style. And sooner or later, they began teasing a return to brutality leading into this new album, whether this was due to creative restlessness or an acknowledgement of their early influences. Even in recent interviews, Phil Bozeman stated that while he was very proud of his recent work, they wanted to prove they could still write some of the heaviest music of their career as well. Guitarist Zakk Wylde even said that the new material could incorporate elements from all eras of Whitechapel, combining the raw intensity of their earlier albums with the refined songwriting of their later work. Quite ambitious. So by early 2025 of this year, Whitechapel became a band with two very distinct identities. The Deathcore Titans, which are bands that gave us This Is Exile and A New Era of Corruption, known for relentless aggression, technical guitar work, and Phil Bozeman's monstrous vocals. On the other hand, you had the Evolutionary Metal Act, a band that experimented with clean singing, atmospheric passages, and deeply personal storytelling from the Valley and Kin. And while some fans feared that Hymns of Dissonance would abandon their recent artistic growth in favour of nostalgia, others were excited in the prospect of a heavier record that could still incorporate the best elements of this evolution. The big question leading to Hymns of Dissonance wasn't whether Whitechapel could still remain heavy, because they've already proven that. The real question was, could they merge their brutality of their past with the maturity of their present without feeling like they're regressing? Well, let's find out by first talking about the album's overall composition and cohesion. So the album is structured with a clear thematic arch, and the flow of tracks feels genuinely very natural. The transitions from relentless blast beat driven chaos to eerie atmospheric passages is executed very well. However, I do feel some of the songs feel somewhat interchangeable as well, particularly the album's middle section as well, where the breakdown heavy tracks almost blend too much without too much distinction. Whitechapel successfully maintain a unified aesthetic across the album, dark, oppressive, and visceral, but they also take some risks as well. You have tracks like Diabolic Slumber, which wave in dissonance, blackened death metal elements, while other tracks like Nothing Is Coming For Any of Us slows things down with some eerie, doomy sections that recall the Valley. Now, all that being said, for an album that prides itself in revisiting deathcore, it might play things a bit too safe in some places as well, lacking the boundary-pushing ambition of the last two records. Interludes such as Ex Infernus serve their purpose well, creating moments of tension before the next auditory assault. And while the pacing feels mostly strong, I do feel the final third of the album slightly loses momentum as well, with some breakdowns feeling less impactful due to overuse earlier on. That said, at just over 40 minutes though, it doesn't overstay its welcome. Now let's talk about the song's songwriting and arrangements. The album definitely delivers with some truly crushing moments. The opening track, Prisoner 666, immediately establishes the tone with eerie choral atmospheres before dropping some of the heaviest riffs that Whitechapel have written in many years. A visceral Ratch boasts one of the album's strongest hooks, while Sims of the Abyss layers harmonized leads with over-chugging riffs in a way that recalled early Behemoths. But I do feel there's a few breakdown-heavy tracks that lack the kind of unique identity that makes for a more lasting impact as well. Structurally, the album is much tighter and more intricate than your typical deathcore release. Instead of relying solely on breakdowns, they incorporate unexpected twists, melodic tremolo passages, tempo changes, and layered dissonance. But I do feel there's some tracks as well that probably rely a little too heavily on the closing breakdowns, creating a sense of maybe too much closure rather than truly evolving throughout. In terms of emotional impact, Bozeman's vocals remain one of the band's greatest assets in this regard. His ability to shift from guttural roars to tormented, almost like spoken-like sections, adds an emotional depth that elevates the otherwise nihilistic lyrical themes of the album. The album is undeniably very heavy, but it also carries a palpable sense of doom and despair, which makes it more than just an exercise of sonic aggression. Lyrically, the concept of a cult leader embodying the 7 deadly sins is very intriguing, but I also feel the lyrics themselves feel more serviceable rather than poetic. If you listen to the lines of The Void Beckons or Begettural Offering, it effectively paints a grim, apocalyptic atmosphere, but there's also some moments that feel like standard metal fare rather than pushing into truly thought-provoking territory. Now let's talk about the performance and musicianship of the album. The guitar work is undeniably very sharp, with a mix of tremolo-picked fury, chugging riffs, and occasionally melodic flourishes. Drummer Brendan Zacky's precision in endurance is very notable in this album, as he seemingly shifts between fast-pacing blasting and then going into slower, groove-oriented sections. And while the technical execution is extremely tight, there are also moments when I feel the album feels like it's showcasing force over finesse as well. Sometimes Whitechapel has balanced this better from previous albums, but I don't feel it's the case in this one. For example, a few breakdowns, particularly in The Hunger Within, feel like they exist just to be heavy, rather than serve the song dynamically. As I mentioned, vocally, Bozeman remains a master of his craft. His growls are utterly punishing, his high screams cut through the mix with shearing intensity, and his spoken passages add an unsettling narrative weight to the album's themes too. For me, I think it's a shame though that his clean vocals are almost absent in this album though, and whether that's a deliberate choice to recapture the band's earlier sound, I feel it's a missed opportunity given how well it was utilised in both the Kin and the Valley. So it's a tough balance to strike there for me. The drums and bass work very well, providing a thick driving force behind the music. However, I hate to say this again, the bass is occasionally buried in the mix, especially during the bassier guitar passages. We need that low end, people. If there was more presence in the album in the low end, it would make the album so much heavier and give it a much more punishing feel. Am I the only person who's saying this at this stage? On that, let's talk about the production and sound quality. The album is polished without feeling too sterile, which is great, but the mix also leans into the guitar tone, sometimes at the expense of the rhythm section as well. So while the drums cut through sharply, I feel some snare hits feel slightly over-processed as well. Overall, the mix, I just feel it's powerful but could feel more dynamic too. The guitars are thick and very crushing, tuned lower than in past records too, giving more certain moments an almost sludge-like weight. The bass, as I mentioned, could use a bit more definition though, so I feel that low end has probably come at some expense to the bass as a result. The drums, while powerful, do feel a little too processed at times, particularly in the faster blast sections where I feel it could have sounded so much better if it was sounded more organic rather than mechanical. Bozeman's vocals sit very well in the mix, not overpowered, not buried either, and the atmospheric elements such as the choral effects and subtle synths are used sparingly but effectively, so they use it very well in my opinion. Now let's talk about the creativity and originality of this album. So I'm happy to report that Whitechapel have very successfully reclaimed their deathcore identity while integrating elements from extreme metal subgenres. I do feel though the album doesn't push the boundaries the way that the Valley and Kin do. While the sheer brutality will satisfy long-term fans for their older sounds, those expecting more of a genre blending ambition like they talked about of recent years may find it slightly more predictable. The band definitely wear their influences on their sleeve, bits of Dying Fetus, bits of Die Artist Murder, and even Decapitated are present as well. But the album still feels distinctly Whitechapel. I do feel they play too safe at times as well, relying on familiar structures rather than breaking new ground, so looking for that blend I think they still missed out. Which brings me on to the replay value and impact of the album. The sheer heaviness of this album will bring listeners back, without a question. I really enjoyed listening to this album. But whether it's the lasting effect of Whitechapel's best work for me still remains to be seen, as I feel the lack of significant progression from their recent material might limit their long-term appeal. Songs like Prisoner 666, Viscera Ranch, and Nothing Is Coming for Any of Us are likely to be fan favourites going forward thanks to their dynamic structures and memorable moments. And while Hymns of Dissonance definitely reinforces Whitechapel's status as one of the genre's most reliable acts, I do feel it may not be the game changer like The Valley was. Still, it's a very strong release that will likely be embraced by long-term fans and could spare as a solid entry point for any newer listeners for sure. So my verdict is very simple on this occasion. It's a very well executed return to heaviness, but at times it feels like a slight step backwards rather than a leap forward. It doesn't give that blend like they talked about of heaviness and their new atmospheric elements combined. It's brutal, it's engaging, but it's not their most adventurous work. But going forward, this could be the pathway to that, so fingers crossed for that one. And that's another metal music review, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked today's review, please give it a like. If it's your first time here, or if you've seen our videos before and you haven't subscribed to this set, please do for more videos coming up. And what do you think yourself? What do you think of the album? Do you agree or disagree with me? What are your favourite songs? What do you think of Whitechapel coming up to this album and going into this one? Please let us know in the comments. In the meantime, we'll be back for more metal music reviews very soon. In the meantime, my name is Dave Cullen. It's been Put the Metal On. Stay safe and enjoy the metal.